Hey there, friends and enemies, JoPa here again, and today I want to give my predictions on the 6 games I believe will be nominated for Game of the Year in 2024. Keeping in mind, this doesn't necessarily mean these are the 6 best games of the year, but instead they're the games that not only were highly rated, but also had a lot of impact on the video game industry as well as gamers as a whole. So bearing that in mind, I'm going to go through my top 6, also talk about the biggest snub, and start off with the games that I think are most likely to win because they're the easiest to call for me personally. First off, we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I do think this is going to be the frontrunner heading into the award season, and for good reason. It's probably the biggest, most complete package among the AAA titles, and as a massive sprawling RPG, it does feel like one that is a shoo-in for a nomination at the very least. There's a lot of things that the game does right. It's got the length that a lot of people are looking for. It's got an interesting combat system, a good story, very good graphics, animations, cutscenes, all of that, pretty much the total package as far as AAA RPGs goes. And so for that reason, I do feel like it is going to be the likely frontrunner. It reviewed very well. A lot of people enjoyed the game, and overall it had a pretty good cultural impact as well, which I think at the end of the day is important. The sales might not have been what Square Enix was hoping for, especially as a PS5 exclusive. However, it is a game that is highly talked about around the industry. Next up is going to be another PS5 exclusive with Astrobot. This is one that I think has redefined platformers of this generation to a degree, and for that reason, even though it's shorter, it does make the list. It's not necessarily a insane graphics, big budget type of entry that you might expect for the Game of the Year, but it does everything that it wants to do very well, and that's something that should be rewarded, even though I don't know if it'll win Game of the Year. I do think there's a lot of people who would put this title as their Game of the Year, and so for that reason, I wouldn't be surprised if it won, but for me, this is one that I just don't know if it does enough of what everyone is looking for in order to win. That being said, it has kind of been a game that in a year where there isn't a Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ring clear frontrunner, does have a significant opportunity to win a bunch of awards. And the studio behind Astrobot should absolutely be commended for that, because relatively came out of nowhere. I don't think anyone was expecting this one to be quite as good as it ended up being, and that's something that is really, really cool to see. Next up is going to be Metaphor ReFantazio. This game, the cutscenes look like an absolute anime pure perfection. It is insane. The story is very interesting. The combat is very good. The overall art direction is phenomenal. If it doesn't win some kind of award for that, I think we've done something wrong with these awards in general. And this is the type of game that I don't normally see even nominated, but this one has done so well with the reviews and with the general audience scores as well that I feel like it's got to be on the list. And that is quite the surprise for Atlas, because they've had a ton of very good games, the Persona series, for example, and I think this might be their full breakout into one of those developers that is really considered a heavyweight in the industry, which is really awesome. And so I do think Metaphor ReFantazio is a worthy Game of the Year entry, and I would not be surprised if it snuck in and won a bunch of awards as well, because of everything it does so well. It's very interesting to me. I'm playing Metaphor as well as Dragon Age the Veilguard at the same time right now, and seeing the difference between the two is very eye-opening, because you really see what each game lacks and what each game does very, very well. Next up is going to be one of the more surprising entries for me, something that I would not be shocked if it didn't make the list, but also I could definitely see it popping on here, and that is going to be Helldivers 2. This game, if you compare it to other live service games this year has done tremendously well. It has really rebounded from a rough spot that it had in a way that I don't see a lot of other games doing. You look at the player numbers for something like this compared to like Space Marine 2, which came out far more recently, but overall has struggled a lot more to retain its audience. Helldivers 2 was such a cultural phenomenon when it dropped. It absolutely dominated the gaming scene. It's wild to think that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Helldivers 2 released in the same window roughly, which is kind of wild to consider. But I think both of these games are worthy of Game of the Year nominations at the very least. Helldivers 2 is such a interesting game in that it seems so simple on the outside, but the gameplay loop is so fun that it is very addictive, and I do think this is one of those games that could be rewarded with a Game of the Year nomination. I don't necessarily think it has a chance of winning, but I could see it being fairly competitive in the award season, which is awesome to see as somebody who really enjoyed the game at launch and has played it ever since. Then we have the next one, which is an indie game. I was torn between two smaller games that I think really came out of nowhere to get people excited. Those games were Animal Well and then Balatro. I think personally Balatro is going to be the nomination, and I say that because of the long-term impact it's had. They've had so many crossovers with other games that they've done a fantastic job of staying relevant, and I know everybody who plays that game are heavily addicted. They play it a ton, and it's one of those games that I think is insanely fun. It's a very unique concept, and I believe deserves to be rewarded for that. So I would not be surprised to see Balatro on there. If Balatro doesn't make it and Animal Well is on there instead, that again would not surprise me either way. However, I don't think either one of them has a chance of winning, but for their own studios, it is nice to see both of them get recognized, and I do hope each of them has the chance to get their flowers at the Video Game Awards, so that way they can really have a chance to shine. Because I will be honest, I didn't think either one of them was going to be nearly as good or well received as they actually end up being, and it's one of those things where, again, I feel like there's a lot of these games that this year have had a chance to shine because there hasn't been that one single title dominating the market, and that's allowed for room for growth for a lot of other titles, which is one of my favorite things. I'm a big fan of variety. And the final entry is going to be one that is going to be controversial for several reasons. And it's not Black Myth Wukong. I don't think it gets nominated. I do think it's very good, but because the Video Game Awards announced recently that DLC and any content released is eligible for any award if it fits the criteria, I do think that leaves the room for Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree to be nominated for Game of the Year. I do not think it's going to win, even though I do think it's one of the best pieces of content of the year. I think it's fantastic. I think From Software obviously gets their flowers. They deserve all the love. They do tremendous things. Honestly, it was hard for me to play Black Myth Wukong at times because I was still playing Shadow of the Erdtree, and the comparisons were unfair to the latter, or to the former. So I do feel like that is something that might impact the thoughts of those who are making these selections. I wouldn't be surprised if that is something people consider. I don't feel like Black Myth Wukong should be punished for being a Chinese game, to be honest. I think I've seen some speculation about that. I do think it's a game that has its flaws, but was so surprising and came out of nowhere that I think people don't necessarily overhype it, but I don't think it's quite as good as people believe it is at times. And if it's your favorite game, that's all well and good. I just look at other games, and judging by my list, pretty much every game on this list, the overall reviews, as well as a lot of times the player scores, are higher for these other games than they were for Black Myth Wukong. So I think Black Myth deserves maybe Action Game of the Year. I believe it should be nominated for some awards. It's a very tremendous game, and honestly, I would actually prefer to see it on the list of nominations over Shadow of the Erdtree. Shadow of the Erdtree is unplayable without the base game. The base game already won Game of the Year, and because it's so linked to the base version of Elden Ring and it's necessary in order to get towards the DLC, I don't think it should be eligible for Game of the Year. Now, they should do a gameplay of the year, content of the year, new content of the year, some kind of additional award, DLC of the year, to recognize Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, in my opinion, because I thought the same thing last year. Phantom Liberty for Cyberpunk 2077 is one of my favorite video game experiences from last year, but it's fully set up by the foundation of having the base game. Without the base game, it wouldn't be considered a standalone Game of the Year entry, in my opinion, and that's my own personal criteria. It's not a spin-off, it is a DLC that is very much linked to the base game. And so for that reason, I think they should have their own award and shouldn't be relied upon to be the Game of the Year when they don't have the chance to really be a standalone experience. And that's something that I will stand by pretty heavily for me personally. We will see. I will be very interested to see. We get the nominations tomorrow, Monday, and I am looking forward to it. We'll see how my predictions play out, whether I was correct, whether I was incorrect. Let me know in the comments down below what you think I got right, what do you think I got wrong. My name is Jopa. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe. As always, have a good one. I'll catch you all later.